The Sony 15mm 1.4 G lens for APS-C cameras is the first prime G lens available. So with a badge like that, does it hold up to its premium $748 price tag? Let's go over that and I'll give you my opinion at the end. First off, this prime is great for vlogging, landscape, cityscape, and just general walking around photos. These APS-C lenses and bodies are so small and lightweight, they make for a great all-day kit that you can take around with you and you might not even feel like you're lugging around a heavy camera. Whenever I'm taking around a full-frame camera and a full-frame lens to just walk around all day with, it does sort of get a little bit heavy. And I noticed if I hand my wife my full-frame camera and my full-frame lens, she doesn't really like carrying it around. I handed her this when we were walking around Toronto and she didn't really mind it, and she actually picked up the camera and snapped a couple photos. So sometimes a small lightweight kit does actually matter a lot. Starting off with the price and specs, the 15mm does cost $748 and it's a 22.5 full frame equivalent lens. That's one of the things about the APS-C lenses is how small and compact they are. This lens is 2.6 by 2.7 inches and weighs only 7.7 ounces. This feels very balanced on this small, lightweight APS-C camera. Using a full frame lens on an APS-C camera can sometimes make the front of the camera bend down a little bit, especially if you have it on a strap over your shoulder. But with this, it does feel really balanced and it doesn't feel like the camera is creeping forward all the time. The build quality of this lens is what you would expect with a G lens. The body is made of textured hard plastic and the focus ring feels very smooth to use. It is dust and moisture resistant and there is a customizable focus hold button, manual focus, autofocus toggle switch, and an iris ring that can be clicked or declicked. This lens has 7 aperture blades and a 55mm front thread. The autofocus is the dual linear autofocus motors, and I've not had an issue with autofocus from this lens at all. This reminds me of my 20mm G lens, even though it's a full frame lens and it uses the dual XD linear motors. The 15mm autofocus is really fast for video, and you can tap a subject and still move around and it will accurately track the subject. And for photos, it is very quick. The sharpness and image quality for the 50mm 1.4 wide open in the center will be sharp, while the edges are just a touch softer if you're pixel peeping the charts. On a normal photo, you may not be able to tell much of a difference. I was surprised at the corner sharpness and contrast even wide open with this lens, but again, it is a prime G lens. By f2, the corner sharpness is really no longer an issue in my opinion, but the one thing to be concerned of is distortion in those corners. There can be some distortion depending on the angles you're shooting of your subject. Holding the lens straight at your subject tends to have the best results, but if you put your subject in a corner of the frame, you will have some more serious distortion that's more apparent. The 15mm handles flares very well when pointed at a light source. This was filmed without the front lens hood attached, so these flares are about as bad as they're gonna get. Once you turn this lens away from a light source, there is a little bit of flare, but it's not too distracting. If you use the lens hood, this would be less apparent. For chromatic aberration with the 15mm, I was zooming in on some of my shots and I was able to see little areas of color fringing and high contrast areas, but once I zoomed out, I really wasn't able to see it unless I was really pixel peeping. In my opinion, the color fringing is pretty well controlled on this lens and is not an issue for me. The bokeh on the 15mm is clean and circular in the center with very minimal distortion towards the edges of the frame. Panning the camera slowly will show you that cat eye distortion towards the edges, but it is minimal. The minimum focusing distance for the 15mm is about 6.7 inches away from the sensor, or it's a little over 4 inches from the front of the lens. You're able to get some nice out of focus areas by placing objects closer to the lens and having a nice blurry background at those low apertures. This lens also has very little to no focus breathing in my testing. It seems like Sony's been getting better with minimizing that focus breathing in their lenses lately, and the 15mm G is no exception. If you're doing rack focuses, even wide open, you'll not have any distracting focus breathing or autofocus hunting. This lens does lack any optical stabilization though. You're still able to take advantage of your Sony's in-body stabilization if your body has that, but there is no OSS on this lens. This is a fantastic lens if you like shooting wider perspectives on prime lenses since it is so fast as well. It is an expensive APS-C lens coming in at $750, but it's offering many high-end features in a pretty small package. This lens is almost half the size of the Sigma 16mm, but it's also more expensive. If you're staying with the APS-C line of cameras and lenses, this is a great performer. If you're ever thinking about upgrading to Sony's full frame line of cameras though, and you don't mind giving up a couple of millimeters of focal length, for another $150, you can get the full frame 20mm G lens. It's a very solid lens, and it has some of the same or better features of this 15mm, but it won't be as wide on APS-C cameras, and it will be bigger and heavier. But if you're ever upgrading, you'll have a great lens to start off your kit with. If you enjoyed this video, check out this video about the 11mm 1.8 Sony APS-C lens, or this video about the 10 to 20mm power zoom APS-C lens. Thank you guys for sticking around to the end, and I'll see you in the next one.